Thank you, Irene, and thank you all for joining. It's a great pleasure to start this presentation and to take you by the hand on the initial steps that have been taken onto CONCRETO Lab, as mentioned by Irene. We were going back and forth the last couple of days with the presentation, and no one really dared to fill in a image on the front page. So in the end, yesterday evening, I thought, oh my God, I still have to put an image there. And after the marvelous architecture that already has been shown by Irene, which I didn't know actually, but I expected you to show. You have this marvelous background also on your Zoom screen. I thought I'll choose something more modest, because that is not that is better or the aim of Concreto, and not those big engineering architect iconic buildings. But I think, and Andrea, it was already touched upon by Irene, it is two sides of the same medal. Concrete architecture can be magnificent, can be very extreme in terms of engineering and architectural explorations, but it can also be quite modest, only structural, hidden by a lot of other materials. But still, the problems related to that and the aims to rehabilitate those constructions stay there. Well, the image is something in between. It's still exposed concrete, but not the big architect's interpretation of that. So presentation today prepared for a larger part by Camilla and Svenja, but presented by Andrea and myself, and Uta Potgie's on the background. So formally, Andrea, Uta, and me are in this project on behalf of Docomomo International, and we have had so far up to today Elisabetta, Svenja, and Camilla working with us. What is Docomomo International? Docomomo International is the non-profit organization for documentation and conservation of building sites and neighborhoods of the modern movement. And Docomomo International is formally only a foundation that is founded in the Netherlands. No one is paid by that. No one is really part of that foundation. The good thing about this NGO is that we represent a lot of international working parties. Docomomo International is active in 80 countries, 80 countries and regions all over the world. And we have the pleasure to manage that a little, to spread the word on modern movement architecture, about documentation and conservation. And we do that through our website and our Docomomo journal, which are the two URLs I mentioned on this slide. So don't hesitate to contact us on more on general on modern movement architecture in any way. But in this slide, I also would like to explain to you why Docomomo is involved in Concreto and why we as Docomomo support the initiative. As mentioned by Irene, Docomomo was founded in the early 1990s after initial activities in the 1980s to bring the significance of the architecture of the modern movement to the attention of the public, the authorities and professionals, and it is already here, the educational community. Dissemination of appropriate techniques and methods of conservation and adaptive reuse. Of course, not only focused on concrete, also all different materials that are connected to the modern movement. But here already, in a nutshell, what is also the aim, or at least one of the aims of Concreto. A few years ago, Docomomo launched a manifesto on education because we think, and not only Andrea and me that are here representing Docomomo, but the whole Docomomo community is convinced that the discussion on better education for modern movement heritage, embracing the ethical, cultural, and social ideas and the values that are not only those 1920s ideas when modernism started, but those are still valid in the 21st century society. So that is why, among others, Docomomo was interested in Concreto as a project and contribute to the proposal and is now involved in this project. So this presentation is called CONCRETO LAB, and this is an image I took from I think from the original application or shortly after. What we are doing, what we are busy doing, is making a certain baseline, a baseline of information. Where are we now? Where are we today? Where did the past years bring us in terms of concrete conservation, in terms of renovating concrete buildings in Europe? So we focus on Europe with a specific eye on the countries involved in the project: Turkey, Madrid, Italy, in random order. I'll try to order them differently every time when I name the countries, but don't blame me if I start with a country and the others follow on that. So what we've been doing is studying existing, or actually not studying yet, but inventorying existing literature on concrete conservation, on concrete renovation, rehabilitation of concrete buildings, studying the different codes, studying the recent history in concrete conservation. We are starting doing some interviews, and the survey is going out. This presentation will guide you through what we have been doing and what we will be doing. And I think this is the aim, or one of the bigger underlying aims of the Concreto project. We want to prevent buildings in general, but in this project, concrete buildings in particular, we want to prevent them from being demolished, from being underused, make them useful again to the next generations. And in order to be able to do so, we need to invest in, and then the detailed photo on the right, everybody may say, oh my God, you better demolish this because it's so far gone. But it is, and I'm not able to tell you the details on this project. This is a Dutch project which had a quite interesting position in the development of concrete architecture in the Netherlands. So that it was chosen for cultural historical reasons to prevent this building from being demolished, and even making a conservation project out of that. Doesn't imply, doesn't mean that every piece of concrete needs to be conserved for ages and ages, but at least we should study that. And that is in this project. I made this list independently of the presentation of Irene, and I think we touch upon the same kind of aspects. Concrete, I always say, concrete doesn't exist. Concrete is something. It's a collection of a different kind of materials. It's a wide range of materials. Of course, they are all composed out of one or more binders. They have a fine aggregate, they have a coarse aggregate. Some water has been added to mix it all together and to set it to become from a plastic material a hard material. Sometimes some admixtures, sometimes reinforcement in one way or the other, no reinforcement. The material is used as structural, non-structural. It is cast in situ, it is precast. The difference between the industrial component in it and the craftsmanship component has already been touched upon. I already mentioned in the introduction, we have a lot of exposed concrete, but probably we even have more concrete that is not exposed. The formwork that is used to make concrete construction, the formwork that is probably needed to rehabilitate it. The question of durability. We've seen a big historic evolution pointing at 1824, the invention of Portland cement, which was a very important intervention. But not in all concrete is Portland cement. There's quite some other binders also used in concrete. So Portland cement isn't the whole story. The common denominator is that it is a composite material and that it is an artificial material, and that it hardens and sets through a chemical reaction or through a set of chemical reactions in combination with reinforcement. Everybody with a little background in chemistry or a little background in material engineering already knows that it's in a way a toxic combination in terms of durability. So durability of concrete is a big issue, and that is why there are so many different types of damages to concrete. And this is an inventory that is publicly available on the website mentioned on the corner right below. And there might be other glossaries online, but damage to concrete can be categorized in different categories from disintegration to missing parts, and even that can be distinguished to pops out, erosion, and all other names. And I think within this whole scene of repairing concrete, for rehabilitating concrete, we should not forget about this part, because this is actually the underlying part. We are not teaching chemistry, so we are not teaching all the different underlying chemical reactions, but sometimes we need to investigate, we need to assess the specific actions, the specific damaging mechanisms, in order to understand the mechanism that damages the concrete, in order to design the right solution or a right solution. And let's hope on the Friday presentation, we will also hear something about whether a right solution might be the good solution or only a right solution, and how the durability of those interventions are. During the first months of the project, we have been discussing wording, and you hear me already using, and when I use a word, I sometimes think, is this the right word or should I use another word? I'm not solving the issue here, but I want to bring it to the attention of all students in this course. I really like to talk about concrete conservation. And then conservation defined as meaning all the processes of looking after a place so as to retain its cultural significance. But then you would probably immediately say concrete is not only used in buildings that has an attributed cultural significance, but probably that is one of the underlying factors that we should use, that we should change. What is cultural significance? If we talk in this environmental situation with the CO2 pollution and all the other effects that the use of concrete has and had in the past on the sustainability of the earth, actually, we might even see that also in this case we can talk about cultural significance. But that goes probably a bit too far, but I hope within this project we can say something about that, because conservation can include a whole range of intervention, ranging from only little maintenance activities or preservation activities to repair or even reconstruction, copying, imitating, or even improving existing historic constructions, which might be not only from a structural point of view possible, but also for other reasons. And again, here, of course, concrete, the definition. So during this presentation, you will still hear me using concrete conservation, concrete repair, concrete renovation, and even rehabilitation. But I'm quite sure in LECO and in Ivrea, we will have discussions on this sometimes quite theoretical, but always directly applicable to the choice for the intervention to made and how to deal with that. And now I gave over to Andrea, who will lead you through the next couple of slides. I will still be pointing to the next slide. So Andrea, find a way to indicate to me how I move to the next one, but we'll get there. You have to unmute, Andrea.
Thanks. There is something that prevents me to unmute unless I'm not authorized. So now I'm here. Yeah, so this it's very important, these notes that Vido did on this use of these two words, because we try to make clear which type of approach we have, but this type of new approach or this type of approach that we know is something that is coming from a long time ago. So which is the context in which this type of sensitiveness for concrete, this evolution of our feeling about concrete, where it's coming from. So if we are not going so far, but we just stay on the last decades, so from the 70s to today, what we know is that this repair versus conservation, it's always been something that was part of the debate on what to do with concrete structure and manufacture. We started with the idea that we had a recognition of the concrete as cultural heritage, because initially, of course, reinforced concrete structure were not considered at all cultural heritage. But over the time, many of the masterpieces of our modern architecture became more and more fragile, more and more, they have more and more necessity to be preserved or to intervene on that. So this idea that the recognition of the modern as cultural heritage was rising up at the same time in which was rising up the attention for the material that constitute this type of heritage, and so concrete. So at the beginning, we had a lot of emblematic cases of very important masterpieces that were showing different conservation strategies, from the minimal intervention to the reconstruction. But those emblematic cases, those study cases, were not able alone to make any methodology, to make any guideline for what to do. Everything at the beginning was experimental, and everything was a moment in which we were trying to learn something about what we can do on this type of heritage. And as always happened in the approach with the restoration of heritage and with the restoration of new materials, usually the first attempt is always to reconstruct, to redo, to make things as they were. And this was applied also to the concrete heritage. Was the first try, the first feeling was, let's save this type of things. What is happening nowadays? We have a more and more deep knowledge of what is happening, and we have a large knowledge of what we can do actually on the concrete. So we are in a moment in which it's not anymore the problem of having study cases or experimental intervention, but we are more in a moment in which we have a lot of knowledge, and I will show you the evolution of this knowledge later on. And we are in a moment in which training and awareness are really two of the keywords that we need to put on our table. And that's why also we are in the CONCRETO Academy. because of course the conservation of the reinforced concrete requires precise and specific skill, but these type of skills include a precise type of awareness of what we are trying to preserve or not. In this slide, you can see what about this type of first attempt. When was born this attention? Well, it's the end of the 80s, as you can see, and the first association that were trying to tackle on this precise idea of concrete repair and protection were the Concrete Repair Association in the UK and the International Repair Institute in the US, and a very important part of the French Ministry of Culture of the LRMH, the Paul Breton, that founded his own specific workshop on the concrete. So it's the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. Next. And at the same time, we're growing up publication and studies on that. So you can see in this very short timeline that is coming from the database that we built up on the state of the art of our knowledge about concrete, that from the first publication of the French Paul Breton in 1996 to the Docomomo technology dossier to other publications, that from 1996 to the beginning of the 20s and finishing with annotated bibliography made by the Getty in 2015, this attention was growing up, and this attention was also producing a lot of documents, books, and studies, so that in 2015 we were in the moment and in the condition to talk about an annotated bibliography exactly on this topic. Next. And from 2015, what we can see is that publication became more specific on that, and the studies became more specific on that. So what to do with the concrete in modern architecture, what to do with the fair face concrete, and what we can do with cleaning historic concrete, and a lot of other study cases that were showing this evolution of the attention were set up in those type of publication that, as you can see, from 2015 to 2021, arrive until our nowadays and follow this evolution. Next. In this evolution, there was also a program that I guess a lot of you knows. There was the Keeping It Modern of the Getty Foundation program, and in that Keeping It Modern, a lot of concrete building were in this idea of making conservation plans. So the idea was a lot pushing the idea of conservation plan, so preventive conservation, what to do for defining the conservation in a time that is more long than just the initial intervention, but what from this program came out, in which context this program was producing its result, and how these results can be useful if they are. Next. If we look at this evolution from the point of view of guidelines or charter, two elements to publication are absolutely important. So from the Madrid and New Delhi documents, so the approaches to the conservation of 20th century cultural heritage, that is stating a large methodological framework like the Bora Charter that Vido was quoting before, And this is methodological, so it's still is now an important framework to understand what to do with this type of heritage. But this type of methodological things was so large that the same group, the International Specialist Committee on 20th Century of the ICOMOS, was within an important European research program that was Innova Concrete, was arriving to define very specific guidelines for the conservation of the concrete heritage that arrived to the Cadiz document that is very specific on the concrete. Nevertheless, this document is still about what can we do with that from still methodological approach, and so it's just going deeper in this type of approach. But still we have, and this is why there is this yellow signpost for our codebook, that we think that there is the need to make another further step on going deeper in this sequence from the methodology to the single methodology on the element to something that can be our codebook. So something that is closer to our to the idea of the approach of the concrete approach to the concrete. For example, that we put here, and it's just one of possible suggestion. Of course, it's not our code, otherwise the work is done. There's no work to do, but this is just one approach that we want to use as a benchmark. We have a Dutch example that is this one, that is translated is the execution guideline for the concrete restoration. So very practical approach to that, as you can see, there is the link then, so you can then look at the publication, but I just bring your attention on the red column on the right of this code, that in a way it's already saying there are a lot of practical steps that you have to pass through to have a real approach to the restoration of the concrete as executional guidelines. So this is a possible approach for that. So moving from that, we are trying to go on and to build up our code. Next, which is the starting point that is important. I just show you some book covers because it's interesting to focus on to have a visual idea of that. But behind that visual idea, there is a huge work of research that has been made in the database of reference that we are using, with those goals that you can read there. So which are the existing industry standard guidelines, which type of existing organization, which major publication, which conference, which training certificate, and which educational programs are dealing with the conservation of concrete, and which type of results do we have. Next. This is so it doesn't make sense to show a database in a presentation like this one. So I just show you the output in a very synthetic way. So we, as you can see, we have a lot of existing industry standard, 301 standard for the concrete, and we have a lot of also best practices, 88, but they are not. It's a nice number, it's a good number, but it's nothing compared to the number of the industry standards. Few existing organizations, only 13, and very few current certification and educational program, 4 and 6. So this is the relationship between what is happening on the topic. A lot of industry standards. Next, if we go deeper in those best practices, and you can see, we have books and articles and conference proceedings and management plans, and more or less it's a well-balanced distribution on that on the topic about what are the studies, because those best practices can also be named research, which is moving on that. So books, articles, conference proceedings, etc., etc. Next. Let's have a close-up also on the existing industry standards. And here it's much less balanced than before. So the standards are the main part of this part. Few codes, few technical reports, few guidelines or technical notes, 254 standards. So this is very unbalanced from this side. So then the question is, what to do with that? How it's reflecting on our practice. Next. And it's interesting to know also, to see how this type of data is distributed over time, because it's really telling what is happening on the topic. As you can see here, we divided the industry standards are in green, and studies and research are in blue, and organization and conference in red. And as you can see, if the organization and conference can stay more or less on the same line, there is a peak of attention on the industry standards around 2010. So from nothing. So the first at the beginning of this attention on the topic, of course, were the organization and conference, the first place in which we were talking and tackling on the program. But then there was this peak of industry standards in 2000. Then, of course, going down, because quite everything was put in some standards. And in the same time, from 2010, again, we see that it's the research, it's growing, it's slowly growing, and it's growing in the last decades. Next. Here we go again on this differentiation, conservation, repair. So with all the attention that we already said about difference between conservation and repair, and how there are sometimes the same things or confuse one with the other, is interesting to say. We just try from the database to take out some data to look what is the attention of those, when are we using those words, and how are we using the words, because of course those two words brings with them an idea of how to approach the topic. And the result was this one. Once again, exactly with the same peak that we had for the industry standards, we have a peak of attention to the idea of repair, and the idea of conservation is instead slowly growing and going up at the beginning of the 21st century. Same things on the graphs on the right. You can see, if we apply this idea of conservation, this idea of repair on best practices and industry standards. Of course, it's just saying the same things. We have this peak of repair for the industry standards, but as you can see in the graph above, the conservation, it's absolutely going in the same way when we are talking about research and existing industry standards. It's very interesting, this graph on the conservation that is about best practices in these standards. So the same evolution, it's really saying something. Next. And then we try also to understand who are addressed to all these studies. And here the results are well, we are expecting, but it's always very different when you see that in graph and histograms like this one. So we see that there is a lot of attention, of course, on the academic, because that most of the time is that the place in which those things are approached, studies, so the problems and the solution to the problems rise up in those places. So a lot of attention for the academic, and a lot of attention for the professionals, because of course they are usually the people that have to make decisions and to prepare those decisions for applying intervention on the built heritage. Very, very few, and it's a little bit disappointing. I don't know if it's disappointing, but it's that there's no attention for the public administration, and it's a pity. Why? Because they earn a lot of this type of heritage, and they are the people that a lot of time are in charge of deciding things, because a lot of time they have the money. So it's not considering that it's really a gap. And then, of course, vet workers. A few things addressed to vet workers, but they are the people that are really making real our decision, making real the decision of the academic, and making real the decision of the professional. So why this lack of attention for them? This is also an interesting output of this database report. So from this, we open the idea of what to do and which type of gap we have to address in those yellow code book that you see in you saw in the previous slide. I think that now I give the floor again to Vido, because after the database we see what is happening about our research going on.
Thank you, Andrea. And actually, the next slide is my slide, but I think this one is a perfect one to bridge also to the questionnaire, because I think, and I'm not claiming this research and this data is complete and perfect at the moment, but this definitely illustrates the need of a project such as the Concreto Academy, because there is a lot being done, a lot being studied, a lot being published on concrete and concrete conservation in academia. There are a lot of best practices professionally and academically shared with the respective public. So it is now time to take the next step, and the next step is to make the knowledge available, and not only make it available, but also turn it into usable information, guidelines, and whatever needed for everyday work on concrete, whether it's heritage, whether it is ordinary buildings. But I think this slide already illustrates that. And to further dive into that, yes, it's working. To further dive in this this knowledge gap or skill gap, we have set up a questionnaire, a first questionnaire addressed to architects and engineers, or engineer architects, whatever you want to call them, and craft workers working in the business of concrete conservation and concrete repair? Are we able to confirm in practice what we have seen already on the previous slide, that in academia some attention has been paid to concrete conservation and concrete repair, but that seem to not have completely landed in practice? So what are the skill gaps regarding concrete repair? Are we able to, through a questionnaire, understand the process of concrete repair in practice? And then I do not mean the act of repairing, but in terms of assessment, design of an intervention, etc. And is maintenance of a repair or maintenance of concrete buildings, concrete constructions in general, is that already taken into account? I have to say, there are two types of questionnaires that have the same kind of basis, but there are slightly different questionnaires addressed to architect, engineers, and craft workers. And those questionnaires are, again, targeted at the three countries of which also learners are involved in the project: Spain, Italy, and Turkey. And it's not for you completely to read, but that's beyond the point here. We have drafted or templated two questionnaires: a questionnaire to be addressed to vet learners and to architects and engineers. The template has been created by Docomomo in collaboration with the other project partners. Over the last 2 weeks, those templates have been translated to the Italian, Spanish, and Turkish background, and already some questionnaires have been distributed, and even some answers have already get back to us, but it's now too early to really share with you the statistical analysis of that, because we only have a few responses back, which I would like just to show as an illustration. Here I took out two example questions referring to the type of concrete repair craft workers are executing, and the second question on the right of the screen, on which type of concrete repair or conservation, retrofitting, maintenance they would like to have more training. Because the numbers are quite small, they are only indicative, and it's most likely also relates to the specific group of people the questionnaire has been distributed to at the moment. But apparently quite some people are executing concrete repair, crack repairs, a little less concrete coatings and patch repairs. And if we see, and that's quite interesting, the other side, the second question, which type of techniques those people that answered also the first question would be interested in to learn further. And again, here the data is too small yet to make the analysis of whether the ones that now execute concrete crack repairs would like to have more education on concrete crack repair, or even would like to extend the knowledge to other types of repair. That's something to be found out in the next phase of the project. And it's an appeal to probably also the learners here. You might have received already the questionnaires distributed in your own network, and it's also again an appeal to the vocational training institutes and the trade organizations. Disperse these questionnaires as broad as possible in your country, in your regions, to collect a lot of information. The more data we have, the more analysis we can do, and we can dive into more detailed conclusions from that. But this now just to indicate you where we are going, what we are collecting, And again, it's not statistical research for the sake of statistical research. It is a way to get grip on the position of workers in concrete repair, both on the craft worker side and on the designing, architect, engineering side. So that brings me to the final slide, or almost the final slide. Again, this scheme which was on the second slide, I hope and I actually expect that we have made clear to the audience that we are getting there. We are getting the overview of publications available. The next step, of course, will be making those publications available to you in a certain ordered way, but more on that later. These graphs that have been shown are already the first indications of a synthesis, which is a statistical synthesis, but we will also make a bit of a contextual and content synthesis in the few weeks in order, and that's actually my last bullet, to come to the first version of the code book. Again, here the third bullet point. Promote, please, the surveys, distribute it as soon as and as broad as possible to your potential audience in order, and that's really what I hope we made clear, we're trying to create a baseline of knowledge, a baseline of lack of knowledge, gaps there are in education, gaps that there possibly are in literature, in order to feed this CONCRETO project. And as Irene already said this morning, and I will reuse that, you are the first group, so you are a bit of the guinea pigs, and we will thankfully use you and also ask you to feed us back as much as possible on all this information. Again, here we will propose a common vocabulary without going in pages of definitions, but I think when we are there to advance concrete conservation on a European level, we cannot avoid the discussion on the common vocabulary. Of course, we all have our different cultural and linguistic background, so I know for sure that is not easy, but we will at least give it a shot and see where we get. So thank you. Well, in the chat there were already the hashtags mentioned, so I was, during the previous presentation, I was copying in the hashtag tags in this presentation. It will be shared with you, and again, the choice of the final image, it's actually an image of the Delft University of Technology, which has quite some concrete buildings on its campus, like many other university campuses in Europe, but actually all over the world. I on purpose did not put one of the other university buildings, the Ola building of TU Delft, on this image, because that is a building I will address another talk, best practice tomorrow, but that's more for tomorrow. For now, this was the end of the presentation on the CONCRETO lab, as it is called. Thank you.